Senator Julianne Ortman has served on the Taxes Committee for the past 8 years, 4 of those as the lead minority member. She is now the first female to chair that committee. Senator Ortman, thanks for joining us here on Capitol Report.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
And please I apologize in advance for my froggy voice.
No problem.
So when you were first elected to the Senate Taxes Committee to chair that committee, you did issue a release stating, "The state's budget deficit presents a unique set of challenges and offers an opportunity to adopt significant reforms in Minnesota's tax system." So what are some of the challenges and reforms that you envision?
Well, we do have a $6 billion deficit. The forecast just came out from November showing that we actually had less revenues than was projected back in February. And that's disconcerting news. We were expecting about $33 billion with a projected spending arc of $38 billion. So that's a very big $6 billion deficit. Now we have $32 billion in revenues. So our projections from February were off by about $1 billion. So the next challenge ahead is the big one. It's how do we deal with that $6 billion deficit? But we are up to that challenge. I think that Minnesotans are looking for government to solve this big problem so that they can see confidence and see a growing economy. They want us to work to balance the budget so that that confidence and that economic climate will encourage new jobs and new businesses in the state of Minnesota. So those are the challenges. I think we're up to the task. I'm excited about serving with Senator Clara Roebling, who will be the finance chair, and we will be working together because when you cut the spending, you have opportunities to do something with tax policy and vice versa. They work so closely together that one thing plays off of the other all the time. So we'll be working very closely together to make sure that we cut the spending and also create opportunities to make some tax reforms and cuts. I think those reforms will come first and foremost in the areas of corporate franchise taxes and sales taxes. The corporate franchise tax, predominantly because that will be a job stimulus program. If we can allow businesses to keep more of their income, they can invest it in new employees, in equipment, and in innovation. And it will basically send the message across the country that Minnesota's open for business. We have a welcoming climate, and we're going to allow Minnesota businesses to invest here. So that's number one on the list, is to look for ways to cut that corporate franchise tax, perhaps phase out some of the taxation, and then to maybe marry that up with the sales tax reforms. We have a very high rate comparatively to the rest of the nation, and if we were to look at some reforms and maybe expand the base, we could cut the rate for all Minnesotans who pay sales taxes. But we haven't really put together the committees yet. We've got lots of work to do to get to January 4, and I'm excited about having these conversations about tax reforms and our spending policies.
Going a little bit further with the reform issue, outgoing Revenue Commissioner Ward Ines stated on last week's Capitol Report he believes that to make the tax structure a little less volatile, it needs to focus more on consumption-based taxes and less on income and corporate taxes. But he also acknowledged that this type of reform is very difficult given the current budget situation. What are your views?
I would agree with Commissioner Ines. It would be a huge reform, and I'm just not sure we can take on that size of a reform and a change in our corporate or in our tax structure right now. Right now, that $6.2 billion deficit is the biggest challenge.
Former chair of the Senate Taxes Committee and incoming minority leader Tom Bach continues to challenge the claim that former budgets were balanced without revenue. He cites property tax increases and user fees as examples. He contends revenue is going to be necessary in 2011. Would you agree with his statement?
No, I wouldn't agree with his statement. I'd say that there are really several different things that he's talking about there. I don't think Minnesotans distinguish a whole lot between taxes and fees, whether the taxes are imposed at the state or at the local level. Taxation is a burden for Minnesotans. They are overburdened at this point, whether it's a fee, whether it's a local tax, or whether it's a state tax. So we know that, and we know we need to work on that. But I don't believe that we need to generate new revenue or additional revenue in the state of Minnesota to balance our budget. I believe that we can do it without that. Minnesotans expect us to do it without raising brand new revenue.
I'm talking a little bit more about that business climate. Do you expect the committee to support bills for a new Viking stadium?
You know, when we went and knocked on doors during the election season, we didn't hear Vikings, Vikings, Vikings. We heard jobs, jobs, jobs. And then we heard budget, budget, budget. It's there, everybody's aware of the issue, but it's not on the top list of priorities. I can't imagine it's even in the top 10. We'll get to those big issues first. Minnesotans want us to resolve them first, and then we'll get to other issues. If we can work something out with the Vikings, great, but we're not going to be raising general tax dollars to supplement the Vikings. There may be some alternative ways to help them, but we're a long ways from having hearings on Vikings proposals.
And you touched upon alternative ways to fund it. Expansion of gambling, is that something your committee would pursue as well?
That issue would come up in my committee if we were going to have Racino. I think that's what you're talking about. Most people don't really see that as an expansion of gambling. I don't want to mince words with you, but there's so much gambling now at these different casinos and across the state, and with pull tabs and things like that, it's pretty hard to argue that Racino would be an expansion. Instead, I think that it would be new competition, certainly. And I think that's interesting. I think we will have some hearings about that. And what we can do with that revenue, I think people have different thoughts on that, whether it can be used to supplement the general fund or whether it should be dedicated for particular uses. I'm not sure where we're going to go with that, but I know we'll have some hearings about that issue.
Finally, Chair Ortman, you stated earlier there's a lot of work to be done even before session begins. So what's next?
Well, we haven't really put together the committee structures. We've just identified the chairs of the committees. There are 16 now instead of the 24 as previous. We've set up a schedule, which is a very exciting new schedule, I have to say. We'll run from 8:30 to 5. There will be a break midday so members can meet with constituents who are here. That was one of the challenges we had previously. And then we'll, generally speaking, be done at 5 and then be gone on Fridays so that we can be working with our constituents and meeting at home in our districts. So that's ahead, the new schedule. The Democrats have just decided who their minority members will be, and then we'll be filling out the memberships of these committees. And then we have a lot of hiring to do. We'll be taking on new staff and sorting out some new things. We're still unpacking in the new offices, so there's lots ahead between now and January 4 on swearing-in day.
And Senator Julianne Ortman, thanks for laying out the timetable for us. We appreciate your time.
And thank you for having me.